The clock above the diner's counter ticked loudly, each second dragging for Emma, who wiped down the same table for the third time in 10 minutes. The neon sign outside flickered faintly, casting a pale red glow through the greasy window panes. Morning rush was long gone, and now the quiet hours stretched endlessly, filled only with the clatter of dishes and the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Emma's uniform, once crisp and white, had faded after too many washes. A stubborn stain on her apron refused to come out no matter how much scrubbing she did. She sighed, brushing back a loose strand of hair that had slipped from her messy bun. Her body ached from standing for hours, but it was the weight of her worries that pressed down heavier than anything else. She thought of her mother at home, lying weak on the worn-out couch. Medical bills stacked up on the kitchen counter like bricks forming an impossible wall. Every paycheck Emma brought home seemed to crumble before it could even make a difference. Rent, electricity, medication. And still, there was never enough. Customers often didn't notice her weary eyes or the way her hands trembled slightly as she balanced heavy trays. To them, she was just another waitress, someone to refill their coffee, to smile politely even when their words cut like knives. Emma had mastered the art of swallowing her pride along with the bitterness of their complaints. "Emma, table 4. Wants their check?" barked Mr. Collins, the shift manager, from behind the counter. His sharp tone made her flinch. She nodded quickly, forcing a smile as she hurried to the booth where 2 businessmen waited impatiently. "Sorry for the delay. Gentlemen," she said softly, placing the bill on the table. They didn't look at her, too busy scrolling through their phones. Emma's smile faltered for a moment before she turned away. She was used to it. Invisible. That was what she felt most days. As she passed by the window, the world outside looked just as gray as her mood. Cars rushed by. People hurried across sidewalks, each lost in their own lives. Emma pressed a hand against her apron pocket where she kept a folded list. Groceries she still needed to buy. Bread, milk, soup. She calculated the cost in her head, for the 100th time that week. Would she have enough left over after rent? Could she skip a meal so her mother wouldn't have to? Emma drew in a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was her life now. Long hours, little pay, endless worry. Yet beneath it all, a flicker of determination kept her moving. She had promised herself that no matter how heavy things became, she would not give up. Because if she quit, everything, her home, her mother's care, would fall apart. And so, with tired legs but a brave face, Emma returned to the counter, ready to serve the next customer. She didn't know it yet, but today her small act of compassion would change her life forever. The little silver bell above the diner's door jingled softly as it opened, letting in a rush of cold air. Emma looked up automatically, expecting another hurried customer grabbing coffee to go, but instead, a boy stepped inside. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old. His jacket was too thin for the weather, sleeves frayed at the ends. His shoes were scuffed, one shoelace trailing behind him as he shuffled forward hesitantly. His hair was messy, as though he hadn't brushed it in days, and his small hands were tucked deep into his pockets as if trying to find warmth. Emma froze for a moment, the rag still in her hand. Children didn't usually come into the diner alone. Something about this boy, his cautious steps, his wide eyes scanning the room, made her heart squeeze. He slid onto a booth seat near the window, his legs barely reaching the edge of the cushion. His gaze lingered on a plate of pancakes being carried to another table, following it with an intensity that only hunger could carve into a child's face. Emma approached him slowly, keeping her voice gentle. "Hey there, sweetheart, are you waiting for someone?" The boy shook his head, his lips pressed tightly together. For a moment he seemed ready to bolt out the door. But then his stomach growled loudly, and his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Emma crouched beside the booth, lowering herself to his level. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Liam," he whispered, barely audible. "Hi, Liam, my name's Emma." She offered a small smile, trying to make him feel safe. "Are you hungry?" The boy's eyes flickered with both hope and fear. He nodded once quickly before looking down at his hands. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. She didn't need him to explain further. She could see the truth written all over his tiny frame. The thinness of his arms, the hollowness in his cheeks, the way he couldn't stop staring at the plates of food around him. She knew this diner's rules too well. No food without payment. Mr. Collins had repeated it countless times with an unforgiving sneer. And yet, as Emma looked at Liam, shivering slightly in the booth, she knew she couldn't turn him away. She straightened, her heart beating faster. This was the moment where compassion demanded courage, and Emma already felt the weight of the choice she was about to make. Emma stood behind the counter, her rag clutched tightly in her hands. She glanced at Liam, who sat quietly in the booth, his small hands folded together as if he was trying to keep himself invisible. He didn't fidget like other kids. He didn't even glance around the room. His eyes stayed glued to the menu lying unopened in front of him as though he already knew it was useless. Her chest ached. She turned toward the kitchen, biting her lip. She could still hear her manager's voice in her head, harsh and cold. "Every plate counts, no free meals ever. You want to keep your job, don't forget that." Emma had been clinging to this job like a lifeline. The diner barely paid minimum wage, but it was the only steady work she had. Without it, rent would slip out of reach, bills would pile up, and survival would become impossible. And yet, as she looked at Liam again, trembling in his too thin jacket, all those fears suddenly felt smaller compared to his. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Just one meal. He needs it more than I need rules." Emma walked to the kitchen window and leaned close to the cook, whispering low so no one else could hear. "Could you make me a kid's breakfast special? Extra pancakes, scrambled eggs? And just ring it up on my shift meal, please." The cook raised an eyebrow but nodded. He had seen Emma give up her own staff meal before, sometimes skipping it entirely to save money. He didn't argue. Minutes later, Emma carried a steaming plate to Liam's booth. She set it down gently, her voice hushed. "Here you go, sweetheart. Pancakes, eggs, and a little fruit, it's all yours." Liam's eyes widened, disbelief flashing across his face. He looked from the food to Emma, as if waiting for her to take it back. Is this really for me?" he whispered. Emma nodded, smiling softly. "Yes, Liam, eat. You don't have to worry." For a moment he didn't move. Then, almost cautiously, he picked up the fork and took a bite. The way his shoulders relaxed, the way his expression softened. It was like watching a flower finally, touched by sunlight. Emma turned away quickly, blinking back tears. She knew she was risking everything. But in that moment, as Liam devoured the first warm meal he'd likely had in days, Emma also knew something else. Sometimes kindness had to break the rules. For a few minutes, the diner felt almost peaceful. The usual clatter of plates, the low hum of conversations, the smell of sizzling bacon. It all faded for Emma as she watched Liam eat. Every bite he took seemed to restore a little color to his pale cheeks. For once, she felt like she had done something that mattered. But peace never lasted long in this place. The sharp, clipped sound of footsteps echoed across the diner. Emma stiffened immediately. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Mr. Collins. The owner of the diner was a man who prided himself on discipline and control. His gray suit was always pressed, his tie perfectly straight, his expression carved into permanent disapproval. Employees whispered that he could calculate profit margins faster than he could smile. Emma's heart sank as he stopped near Liam's booth, his shadow falling over the boy's plate. "What's this?" Mr. Collins demanded, his voice cold and loud enough for the nearest tables to overhear. Liam froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. His wide eyes darted toward Emma, pleading silently for help. Emma stepped forward quickly, her palms damp with sweat. I ordered it for him," she stammered. "He hadn't eaten, sir. I put it on my staff meal." Mr. Collins' gaze snapped to her, his eyes narrowing. "Your staff meal?" His tone dripped with suspicion. "That's not what it looks like." That plate is worth twice what you're allowed. And last I checked, this diner isn't a charity. Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to explain, to beg him to see what she saw, a hungry child, a desperate need. But his stare left, no room for excuses. Around them, customers had grown quiet, sensing the tension. A few whispered, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others glancing at Liam with pity. The boy shrank into his seat, clutching the edge of the table as if bracing for impact. Mr. Collins leaned closer to Emma, lowering his voice but sharpening it like a blade. You know the rules. You give away food you steal from me, and I don't keep thieves on my payroll. Emma's chest tightened, her eyes stinging. She wanted to scream that it wasn't stealing, that it was humanity, compassion, but the words tangled in her throat. She glanced at Liam, who now looked as if he might cry, and the sight cut her deeper than Collins's threats. I'm sorry, Emma whispered, her voice trembling. I couldn't just let him go hungry. Collins straightened, his jaw tight. Then you can find another job. You're done here. The words hit her like a blow. Around them, the silence was deafening. Emma felt the ground tilt beneath her, fear and shame colliding in her chest. She had known the risk, but hearing it out loud, losing the one thread of stability she had, still left her breathless. But then she looked at Liam again, crumbs clinging to his small fingers, his eyes wide with fear and gratitude. And in that moment, despite the sting of Collins' words, Emma realized something important. She would do it all over again. Emma stood frozen, her apron strings twisted tightly in her hands. Mr. Collins's harsh words still rang in her ears. You're done here. It felt like the final strike in a battle she had already lost. But before she could even respond, Liam slid out of the booth. His small body trembled as he stepped forward, his voice timid but clear enough to cut through the silence. Please, sir, don't be mad at her. She didn't do anything wrong. Every eye in the diner turned to the boy. His voice cracked as he spoke, but his courage glimmered through the fear. I was so hungry, he whispered. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. My mom, she's sick. She couldn't come with me. She said to be brave and wait until she got better, but His words faltered as tears welled in his eyes. I couldn't wait anymore. I was too hungry. Gasps rippled through the customers. A mother sitting at a nearby table covered her mouth, her own child pulling closer to her. Even the cook peered through the kitchen window, his expression softening. Mr. Collins' frown deepened, but his eyes flickered, just for a moment, with something other than anger. Surprise, maybe. Or guilt. Emma knelt beside Liam, wrapping a protective arm around him. It's okay, she whispered softly, brushing his messy hair back from his forehead. She looked up at Collins, her voice steadier now. You see? This wasn't about rules. This was about a child who needed food. For a long moment, the diner was silent, except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Collins's jaw worked as if he were chewing on invisible words. He glanced around the room and saw the stares of his paying customers, people who weren't admiring his authority, but silently questioning his lack of humanity. One older man at the counter muttered under ire, his breath just loud enough for others to hear. Heartless. Firing a woman for feeding a hungry kid? A flush crept up Collins's neck. His authority had always been his armor, but now it was cracking under the weight of truth. Finally, he looked back at Liam. The boy's eyes were wide and wet, but they carried a kind of honesty no adult could fake. Collins swallowed hard. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before. Where's your mother, son? At home, Liam said softly. She can't get out of bed much. We don't have much food. The room seemed to grow heavier. Emma felt her own eyes sting with tears again, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from relief. Relief that maybe, just maybe, Collins was starting to see the truth. For the first time, his gaze shifted from Emma's apron to her eyes. He saw not defiance, not rebellion, but compassion. And somewhere deep down, a memory stirred, a reminder that Once, long ago, he had been a boy in worn-out shoes, too. The diner remained silent, the weight of Liam's words hanging heavy in the air. Mr. Collins stood there, stiff and unsure, his reputation as a no-nonsense businessman suddenly at war with the human truth staring back at him. Emma held her breath, bracing for the worst. She had already accepted losing her job, but she wouldn't let the boy be shamed for his honesty. If she had to walk out of that diner unemployed, she would still do it with her head held high, knowing she had done the right thing. But then something unexpected happened. Mr. Collins exhaled, a long, tired breath as though he had been holding it for years. His shoulders dropped and the stern mask he wore so tightly began to crack. For the first time since he entered the diner that morning, his voice softened. "Sit down, son," he said gently, motioning toward the booth. "You're not going anywhere hungry?" Emma blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Liam's eyes lit up and he slid back into the seat hesitantly, as if afraid the offer might be taken away. Collins turned toward the cook. "Bill, make the boy a hot meal, big plate, and make it quick." The kitchen erupted into motion, but the real surprise was still unfolding. Collins shifted his attention back to Emma. She was trembling, ready for another lecture. But instead he said, "You did the right thing." Her mouth fell open slightly. She searched his face, trying to see if this was some cruel joke, but his eyes held no mockery now. They held something else, something Emma had never expected to see. Regret, compassion, humanity. "You're not fired," he continued. "Not today. Not for this." His voice caught for a brief second and he cleared his throat before adding, "I was wrong." The entire diner seemed to let out a collective breath. The customers who had been watching the scene unfold exchanged looks of relief, even admiration. The older man at the counter nodded approvingly, while a young mother dabbed at the corner of her eye. Emma felt her chest tighten, but this time it was with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Collins," she whispered. He looked at Liam again, his expression softening further. "No child should have to beg for food, not in my diner, not anywhere." It wasn't just a reversal of his decision, it was a transformation. In that moment, Collins wasn't just a business owner protecting his bottom line. He was a man rediscovering the simple truth that kindness always outweighs profit. Liam smiled for the first time that day, his small hands gripping the edge of the table in anticipation of the meal. And Emma? She stood taller, her heart swelling with hope. The twist wasn't just that Collins had spared her job. The real twist was that compassion had broken through his hardened shell, and in doing so, it changed everything. The smell of freshly cooked food soon filled the diner. Bill, the cook, emerged from the kitchen carrying a steaming plate piled high with scrambled eggs, buttered toast, and crispy bacon. He set it gently in front of Liam, who stared wide-eyed at the meal as if it were a treasure chest placed before him. "Go on, kid," Bill said with a wink. "It's all yours." Liam didn't need more encouragement. He dug in hungrily, his small hands trembling as he lifted the fork to his mouth. Every bite seemed to breathe new life into him, and the sight softened even the coldest hearts in the room. Customers smiled quietly, some even whispering prayers under their breath. Emma sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. She watched as his hunger gave way to contentment, and her eyes shimmered with quiet relief. For so long she had carried the weight of her own struggles, barely scraping enough to pay rent, skipping meals to make ends meet. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was that Liam wasn't hungry anymore. Across the room, Mr. Collins remained standing, his arms crossed, but his expression had shifted completely. His stern features now carried a trace of vulnerability, as though he had just remembered something long buried. For years he had prided himself on discipline, order, and profit. Yet here was proof that kindness was far more powerful than all of it. When Liam finished his meal, he leaned back in the booth, his face glowing with a kind of peace that only comes from being cared for. He looked at Emma and whispered, "Thank you for not letting me go hungry." Emma's throat tightened. She brushed his hair gently and whispered back, "You don't need to thank me. Everyone deserves kindness. Mr. Collins cleared his throat, drawing their attention. Emma, he said, his tone softer than she had ever heard. You have a good heart. This place needs more of that. He hesitated, then added, and so do I. Her eyes widened, caught off guard by the confession. For the first time, she saw not just her boss, but a man trying, truly trying to change. The customers began to leave one by one, many stopping by to pat Emma on the shoulder or smile at Liam. Some even left tips bigger than usual, slipping, folded bills onto the table as a quiet way of saying thank you. By the time the diner emptied, the three of them, Emma, Liam, and Collins, remained. It was quiet, but not the heavy, tense silence from earlier. It was a peaceful kind, like a storm had passed and left clear skies behind. In that silence, healing began. Emma felt lighter, Liam felt safer, and Collins felt, for the first time in years, like a man who could still make a difference. The diner lights glowed softly against the night sky as Emma walked Liam to the door. His little hand held tightly onto hers, and for the first time in a long while, she felt hope blooming in her chest. Behind them, Mr. Collins stood quietly at the counter, watching with a look of reflection on his face. One small act of kindness had changed everything. Emma hadn't planned it. She hadn't expected it. She had simply followed her heart. And in doing so, she reminded everyone around her, including her boss, that compassion still has the power to rewrite lives. That day wasn't just about a hot meal. It was about dignity. It was about humanity. And it was about the truth that sometimes the smallest choices, a plate of food, a gentle word, a moment of courage, can create ripples that change everything. As Liam waved goodbye, Emma whispered to herself, no matter how hard life gets, kindness will always be worth it. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder of the power of compassion, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Corner. And before you go, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Do you believe that one small act of kindness can truly change someone's life? If you do, write the words, "Kindness matters," below. Because in the end, that's what this story shows us. Money fades, power fades, but kindness always lasts.